Have you ever sat through a dinner where every word felt like it was being measured for weight, for sharpness, for subtle impact? Where every smile was stretched just a little too tight, and every compliment left a faint sting behind it? Have you ever felt completely visible and yet utterly unseen, like a ghost at a table full of living people, all of whom had already written your story in their heads before you even opened your mouth? They called it a family dinner. That's what they said. Just a warm gathering, just a night to reconnect, but I knew better. From the moment I walked in, I could feel it, the way they looked at me, not with curiosity, not with warmth, but with polite suspicion, like I might break something if left unsupervised. Their eyes scanned me head to toe in half a second, a subtle glance at my dress, my shoes, my hair, a silent calculation. I was weighed, compared, silently dismissed. No one said it aloud, of course. That's not how this kind of dinner works. It's more delicate than that. It's in the way someone says, "Oh, you look healthy," as if the word healthy is a code for not thin enough. It's in the tone when they ask, "What are you up to these days?" with that hint of restrained surprise that you still exist at all. It's in the silence after you speak, when your sentence drops like a stone into the center of the table and no one bothers to pick it up. I smiled, I nodded, I answered their questions, but inside I was cataloging every shift of eye, every micro expression, every sentence that ended in an ellipsis instead of a period. I had walked into the lion's den with my chin held high, and I was bleeding. Slowly. From paper cuts. The worst kind of pain. Quiet. Cumulative, unacknowledged. They didn't know where I'd come from that night, what I'd left behind to be there. They didn't ask. They didn't think to. Because in their eyes, I was the same girl who had disappointed them, the one who took a different path, the one who never quite fit into the mold they had pre-shaped for me. They didn't see change. They didn't see fire. They saw failure wrapped in civility. But I let them look. I let them talk. I let them draw their conclusions. Because sometimes, the only thing more satisfying than proving someone wrong is letting them prove themselves wrong. They assumed I was there as a guest, as an afterthought, as the girl who had wandered too far from the family line and come crawling back to the dinner table to explain herself. But I had no explanations to give. I had only one thing: patience. Because I knew something they didn't. Something that pulls just beneath the surface, quiet, but impossible to ignore once revealed. And it was coming. Not with fireworks, not with shouting, but with stillness. With a truth so solid and undeniable that once it arrived, it would sit between us like a stone they couldn't move. So I waited. I listened. I let their words pile up like dry leaves, ready for a spark. And all the while I smiled, not because I agreed, not because I was grateful, but because I had already decided that this would be the last time they ever looked through me instead of at me. They had no idea who I really was. But they were about to find out. My name is Helen. I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a small, neatly divided town in Michigan, the kind of place where lawns are trimmed to regulation height and reputations are passed down like heirlooms. In my family, success didn't mean happiness. It meant predictability. It meant pressed suits, firm handshakes, polite nods, and a LinkedIn profile that sounded expensive. It meant private schools, early internships, wedding announcements in the local paper with double degrees in parentheses. It meant never asking questions that couldn't be answered by data or status. It meant knowing your place, playing your role, and never ever straying from the path that was chosen for you before you were even old enough to spell your last name. My brother became a financial advisor before he was legally allowed to drink. My sister studied law at Yale. She didn't even like law, she liked winning, and in our house, that was enough. Winning was love, performance was currency, titles were proof. And then there was me. I didn't want a corner office or a six-figure salary or a plaque with my name on it. I wanted heat. I wanted steel. I wanted the smell of rosemary and garlic meeting melted butter. I wanted a kitchen, not a metaphorical one, not some domestic duty passed down through generations, but a real one. I wanted fire. I wanted to create something that disappeared the moment it was touched, that lived and died on the plate but stayed in someone's memory forever. I knew this at 12. I felt it like a heartbeat. But when I said it out loud, everything changed. My mother blinked once and gave me the kind of smile people give stray dogs, gentle, distant, pained. She said, "Cooking is lovely, sweetheart, just not for a career." My father didn't blink. He said, "We don't raise staff, we raise leadership." It wasn't a conversation, it was a verdict. After that, the idea was exiled from every room. My dreams became whispers, then silence. At family gatherings, when someone asked what I wanted to be, my mother would jump in before I could answer and say, "Helen's exploring her options. She's got so many talents." They didn't mean talents, they meant distractions. I enrolled in business school like a good daughter. I picked a path that wasn't mine, wore clothes that didn't fit me, smiled through classes that made my soul shrink, all while something inside me curled tighter with every spreadsheet and strategic framework. I started having dreams about knives, not violent ones, but precise ones, sharp ones, beautiful ones. I would wake up with phantom smells of yeast and citrus. I started baking at night, quietly, secretly. I would skip social events just to experiment with flavor combinations in a tiny shared kitchen. Nobody knew. Not because I lied, but because nobody asked. Because when you play your part well enough, people stop seeing you. They only see the role. The girl who listens. The girl who doesn't cause problems. The girl who does what's expected. I became very good at disappearing in plain sight, but even the best performances crack under pressure. And one day, I couldn't breathe. I was sitting in a lecture about consumer segmentation when I realized I didn't care if I ever became one of them. I didn't want to speak their language. I didn't want their meetings, their KPIs, their coffee breaks that led nowhere. I left the room, walked straight past my advisor's office, and never looked back. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need permission to escape. I only needed to survive the fall. I left quietly. No announcement, no dramatic goodbye, just a decision made in a whisper and carried out in silence. I packed a suitcase with shaking hands, folded clothes I barely liked, zipped it shut like I was sealing off an entire version of myself. I had $1,538 in my account, a one-way ticket to New York, and a name scribbled on a business card that had lived in my wallet for 8 months. A man who had tasted my dessert at a university gala and said, "This doesn't belong in academia. It belongs in a kitchen." I didn't know him. I didn't know anyone in the city, but something in his eyes told me he meant it. That was enough. I boarded the plane with no plan beyond survival. No apartment, no job, just a pull in my chest and the dull roar of everything I was leaving behind. I landed in a city that didn't know me, didn't care, didn't slow down for anyone. I stayed in a rented room with 3 strangers who never asked my name and didn't care to. The window didn't close properly, and the radiator clicked all night. I slept with socks on my hands. The first job I found was at the back of a narrow restaurant where steam clung to the walls and knives moved faster than thoughts. They didn't ask about my resume. They asked if I could show up. I did. Every day, I washed dishes until my fingers blistered, mopped floors that never stayed clean, cut vegetables until the scent of garlic lived under my nails. I bled, quietly. I burned my wrists on boiling pans, sliced the same spot on my thumb twice in 1 week. I cried in bathroom stalls with the fan on to cover the sound. Nobody called. Not once. No texts asking if I was okay. No emails checking in. My family had made it clear. If I chose this life, I chose it alone. And I had. Fully. But nothing prepares you for the ache of being forgotten. Of watching your phone light up for everyone but you. Of scrolling through holiday photos of smiling relatives who act like you don't exist. I lived on ramen and adrenaline. I slept 4 hours a night. I bought secondhand shoes with soles already cracked. Some mornings, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. But I kept going. Not because it wasn't hard, because it was brutal, but because quitting would mean they were right. And I couldn't let them be right. The kitchen became my only home. The rhythm of the line, the hiss of oil, the clang of metal against metal. Those were my heartbeat. I listened. I watched. I learned. Every insult from the head chef became a lesson. Every burn, a scar I earned. I started to understand the alchemy of food, the discipline behind beauty, the control hidden in chaos. I stayed quiet, always quiet, because I knew I didn't belong. Yet. But I would. Someday, I would. There were nights I sat on the floor after closing, back against the walk-in fridge, hands trembling from fatigue, and whispered to myself, just get through this one. Just this one. And somehow, I always did. I didn't have a mentor, I didn't have support, but I had a spark. A tiny one. Barely alive. But it kept me warm enough to stay alive through the cold. And maybe that's all I ever needed. 3 years passed like a storm I had no shelter from. And by the time I surfaced for air, I wasn't the same person who left Michigan with a suitcase and a stubborn dream. I was someone sharper, harder, stripped of illusion and soothed only by the rhythm of work. I had moved from washing dishes to prepping vegetables, from prep to plating, from plating to running an entire station, not because someone handed it to me, but because I refused to leave until they saw I could do more. I worked in places where the ceilings leaked and the pay arrived late, but the food mattered. I said yes to everything. I learned knife skills by watching others when they weren't looking. I memorized every sauce reduction by smell. I tasted with closed eyes and remembered everything like a language I wasn't taught but somehow already knew. There were nights I worked 3 shifts back to back and went home only to change clothes and come right back. No one praised me. No one pulled me aside to say they were proud, but the dishes started tasting more like me. My voice was in the salt, in the balance, in the choices no one told me to make. That's how I knew I was getting closer. And then, one night, during a small private event at a quiet bistro in Brooklyn, I cooked a course that I had invented in secret, a saffron risotto with roasted lemon and cracked pepper oil, and served it like it was nothing, because if I let myself hope too much, I would have shaken through the plating. A man at the table, calm and unassuming, asked to meet the chef. I stepped out, wiping my hands on my apron, unsure of what to expect. He shook my hand and said only, "Who taught you to do that?" I told him honestly, "No one. I just kept trying." He handed me his card and said, "If you ever want to try for something bigger, call me." His name was James. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He was an investor with a quiet obsession for food and an eye for people who had something to prove. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called. 6 months later, Salt and Hearth opened its doors. It wasn't perfect. The building was a mess. We found mold in the ceiling and cracks in the tiles. The plumbing groaned like it was haunted, but it had light, bones, possibility. I designed everything: the menu, the color of the walls, the lighting that shifts with the time of day, the music, the spacing between the tables. I chose chairs that made people want to linger, plates that curved just enough to frame a dish like art. I built a kitchen that moved like a body, fluid, fast, unforgiving. Every detail had my fingerprints on it. Every mistake, every miracle, every quiet triumph. I hired staff who believed in food the way I did. We didn't come from privilege. We came from fire. And slowly, people noticed. Food critics came quietly at first, then louder. Reviews called it emotive, intensely personal, as if someone cooked through their own memories. Within 6 months, we were on the cover of New York Taste. Within a year, we had a waitlist 3 weeks long. But I didn't call home. I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding, but because I needed to know who I was without them applauding. I didn't build Salt and Hearth for revenge. I built it to survive. I built it because it was the only place where I felt whole. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to become unrecognizable to the people who once told me I'd never make it, so that one day, when they finally saw me, they wouldn't know what to say. 2 months ago, I got the email. Subject line, family dinner. No question mark, just a statement. My sister wrote that we were all expected to gather in the city for a special evening, that Mom had found a new restaurant, something very in demand, very exclusive, and that I should clear my schedule. I clicked the link. I stared at the reservation confirmation for a full minute without blinking. Salt plus hearth. My restaurant, my kitchen, my life. And they had no idea. Of course they didn't. They hadn't followed me. They hadn't cared to. They chose it because someone at my brother-in-law's office mentioned it as the place to impress. They didn't read the chef bio. They didn't notice the signature on the menu. They didn't recognize my name because they had never bothered to learn who I'd become. I considered canceling. I hovered over the RSVP button for a long time, but I didn't. I accepted. I picked out a simple black dress, ironed it myself, pulled my hair back into a clean, low bun. I wore flats, not because I had to, but because I knew they'd read them as humble. I arrived exactly on time. They were already seated. My mother in pearl earrings, my father straightening his cufflinks like he was preparing for a board meeting. My siblings with that same subtle air of polished dismissal they had mastered since childhood. Their eyes scanned me the second I walked up, not warmly, not even with curiosity, just inventory. My mother air-kissed both cheeks and whispered, "You look well, dear," which we both knew was code for, "You've gained weight, but at least you're clean." My father nodded and said, "Still working in food, I hear," as if food were a single, dirty room. As if it were a phase I should have outgrown like bad posture. I sat down, I smiled, I folded my napkin with perfect etiquette. I didn't correct them, I didn't explain. I wanted to see how far they would go, how deeply they could humiliate me inside my own home without realizing where they were. The waiter brought champagne. They chose the second most expensive bottle. Predictable, performative, just enough to show off without risking financial discomfort. As we toasted to my sister's recent promotion and my brother's vacation property, I sat silently, tasting a pairing I had designed myself. "So," my sister asked, her voice sweetened with condescension, "what exactly do you do now, Helen?" Before I could answer, my mother chimed in. "She works in food service, darling. I think she does a bit of everything, catering, maybe front of house." I opened my mouth, closed it again, smiled. "A little of everything," I said. "It's very hands-on." "Sounds exhausting," my father added, buttering a roll with slow disapproval. "But at least you're working." "We're just glad you're supporting yourself," my mother added, with the tone of someone offering charity. I nodded. I kept eating. They critiqued every dish. "Portions are tiny," my father muttered. "This tomato thing tastes like a garden accident," my sister said. "Do people actually eat this? On purpose?" asked my brother-in-law. I felt every word like a slap, each one landing not just on me but on the team behind the swinging kitchen door, on my chefs, on the servers I had trained, on the farmers who delivered produce before sunrise. They weren't just insulting the food, they were mocking everything I had built from blood and bone. But I said nothing, because I wanted them to keep talking, because there is a particular flavor to being underestimated in your own territory. It is bitter, it is hot, and if you can stomach it, if you can let it sit on your tongue just long enough, it turns into something sharper, something far more satisfying than revenge. And I wasn't done letting them speak. The main course had barely been cleared when the real blow landed, not with a raised voice or a cruel word, but with a soft, casual question, the kind that wears the face of concern, but carries the weight of 1,000 dismissals. My mother leaned in slightly, her tone low enough to feel intimate, as if she were about to share something personal. And she looked me in the eyes, not harshly but gently, the way someone looks at a child who doesn't know better, and said, "Helen, sweetheart, do you need us to help cover your part of the meal?" There was a moment where the words just hung in the air between us, too light to catch but too heavy to ignore, and I felt them fall into my chest like stones. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I set it down slowly, deliberately. I looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't mocking me. She genuinely believed she was being kind. She thought this gesture, this offer, was some kind of mercy, as if I should be grateful she noticed I existed at all. as if I should accept the idea that my value could be measured by how much I could afford to contribute at a table that she assumed was far above me. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just swallowed the tightness forming in my throat and forced a thin smile, one that barely reached my eyes. My jaw ached from holding back every word that begged to erupt. Around us, the conversation continued as if nothing had happened. My sister was talking about yoga retreats in Sedona. My father was commenting on the Bordeaux with the kind of authority that only comes from reading labels and repeating wine terms he didn't understand. The waitstaff floated around them like ghosts, professional and unseen. None of them knew that the table they were serving belonged to me. None of them knew that the recipe my brother-in-law had just criticized as too sour for his palate had taken me 6 months to perfect, adjusting acidity, texture, and temperature until it evoked exactly the memory I wanted it to. No one at that table saw the blood I had bled for this space, the bones I had laid into its foundation. They saw only the version of me they had written long ago, the girl who wandered off the approved path and must therefore be lost. I looked at my hands, calloused from 1,000 knives. I thought about every double shift, every insult swallowed in early kitchens, every blister earned in silence, and how none of it mattered now, not to them because I had dared to live outside their frame. The final course was coming, I could feel it. Not the dessert, not the wine, the bill, the moment of truth, the thing that would unravel everything they thought they knew. But I waited. I let the tension live. I let the weight of their ignorance fill the space like fog, slow and suffocating. Because what they didn't understand, what they never could, was that this wasn't just a dinner. It was a reckoning, and it was almost here. The check arrived with quiet ceremony, nestled in a sleek black folder that Marcus placed at the center of the table with practiced elegance, the way one might lay down a final chess piece. And instinctively, my father reached for it, his hand moving automatically, as if this final act would reassert his control over the evening, over the narrative, over me. But before he could lift the cover, Marcus gently placed his fingers on the folder, just enough pressure to stop the motion without creating offense, and with the calm authority of someone who knows exactly what he's doing, he said, "No need, sir. The bill has already been handled, per Chef Helen's instructions." And just like that, the table stilled. Like a lake just after a stone hits the surface. Every movement, every conversation, every breath seemed to pause in that single sentence. My father's fingers hovered above the folder, my mother's head tilted slightly as if her ears had betrayed her. My sister blinked, once, slowly. My brother-in-law leaned back as if trying to reprocess the scene. Marcus turned to me then, the smallest, respectful nod in his voice, and added, "The investors are waiting in the private room when you're ready. Shall I go ahead with dessert service or hold it?" I met his gaze, steady, unwavering, and replied softly, "Hold it. I'll join them in a moment." Then I turned to the table, to the people who had spent the entire night dissecting my life with blunt instruments and smiling mouths, and I watched the understanding begin to form. Not fully, not yet, but cracking through the edges of their certainty like light slipping through a closed door. "Wait," my father said, his voice different now, not dismissive but searching, as though suddenly unsure of the ground beneath him. "Chef Helen?" My mother spoke next, barely above a whisper. "What does he mean by that?" I rose from my chair, slowly, with the kind of calm that comes only after years of being underestimated, years of building something sacred in the dark, and I let my voice carry just enough weight to land clearly. "This is my restaurant." I paused. Let the silence settle again. "Everything you've eaten tonight, I created it. I designed the menu. I chose the wine list. I trained the staff. This space, this atmosphere, the food, the service, it's all mine." My sister's jaw dropped slightly, confusion spilling into disbelief. My mother looked as though she had just been asked to solve a riddle in a language she didn't speak. My father sat back in his chair, blinking, processing, calculating. I stepped back just once and added, not with arrogance but with truth. Welcome to Salt and Hearth. No one said a word. For the first time in my life, I was not the girl they pitied, or the black sheep they whispered about at dinner parties. I was something else, something they hadn't prepared for. And the best part? I hadn't done it for them. I'd done it despite them. My mother reached across the table, her hand slow, tentative, fingers brushing against mine with the kind of softness that only appears when control is slipping. And in a voice I hadn't heard in years, small, almost childlike, she asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" There was no accusation in it, just a hollow space where certainty used to live. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman who had judged me, silenced me, redirected me, but a person who, for the first time, had no script, no rehearsed response, no elegant deflection. I smiled, not to soothe her, not to win, but because I finally understood the answer. If I had told you, I said, would you have listened? She didn't respond right away, just blinked, slowly, as if trying to process the fact that I wasn't angry, wasn't lashing out, wasn't asking for anything at all. My father cleared his throat, that old business-like habit resurfacing, and said, "Helen, this place, it's impressive, truly. I didn't know you had this kind of vision." Vision, as if it were some technical skill, not a part of my soul. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence did the work. My sister asked if we could catch up over brunch sometime, her voice gentler than I'd ever heard it, stripped of its usual edge, like she had just realized I wasn't someone she could measure in bullet points. Even my brother-in-law, who had mocked the wine pairings 20 minutes earlier, was now looking around the room with a new kind of calculation, as if trying to determine how someone like me had managed to build something they couldn't even understand. "I think," my mother said quietly, "we may have misjudged you." I gave the smallest nod. Not out of agreement, but acknowledgement. "It's okay," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm just done waiting." That was the truth. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't hurt anymore. The part of me that had craved their approval had gone quiet long ago. And standing there, surrounded by the very walls I had built with no one's help, I realized that I had never truly wanted revenge. I had only ever wanted to be seen for who I was, not who they hoped I'd become. As they stood to leave, awkward and uncertain now, my mother turned once more and asked, "Would you come to breakfast with us this weekend? Nothing formal, just to talk." I considered it, not because I needed their invitation, but because, for the first time, it wasn't wrapped in judgment. It felt human. I smiled again, softer this time. "Maybe," I said. "But next time, let's meet somewhere new. Somewhere I don't have to serve you to be heard." She nodded, eyes glossy, and I could tell she understood. Not completely, but enough. And as I watched them walk out the door, my family for the first time no longer the center of my identity, I felt nothing sharp. Just peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from finally choosing yourself without apology. I stayed behind after they left, sitting alone at the table while the last clinks of silverware and soft laughter faded into the hum of closing time. The candles were flickering low, casting warm shadows across the white linen, and the staff moved around me like they always did, efficient, respectful, present. But tonight felt different. It wasn't just a shift that had ended, it was a story, a chapter, maybe even a book. And I was still here, not broken, not bitter, just finally whole. The air felt lighter. When I finally stood, I didn't rush. I walked through my kitchen slowly, hand trailing along the polished counter like touching something sacred. The line was spotless. My chefs were joking, folding aprons, prepping the base sauces for tomorrow. Miranda gave me a wink. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, smiled. "I think I am." She didn't press. She just nodded back, as if to say, "Good, now let's keep going." Because that's the thing no one tells you about healing. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly in the moments after the storm when you realize you're not waiting to be saved anymore. The next morning, I was back in early, like always. I wasn't riding a high, I wasn't glowing with revenge. I was checking vendor invoices, reviewing the prep list, tasting the first batch of seasonal soup. It was just another day, but it wasn't. because I knew now deep in my bones that everything I had built was mine. It wasn't for approval, it wasn't to prove anything. It was simply the life I wanted, and every day I chose it again. Breakfast with my family did happen that weekend. We met at a little cafe in the East Village, neutral ground. No waitstaff I trained, no menus I wrote, just coffee, soft eggs, and hesitant smiles. My father wore a sweater instead of a blazer. My mother looked nervous. My sister brought a small bouquet of dried lavender. We didn't rehash the past, we didn't pretend the wound hadn't existed, we just let it be. We asked small questions, gave real answers. My mother reached across the table once to fix my collar. She didn't say anything, but the gesture said enough. We're not perfect now, they still don't understand everything I do. Sometimes they still ask the wrong questions, but they ask, they listen. And more importantly, I don't need them to get it. I just need them to meet me where I am. Since then, life has continued in its beautiful, relentless rhythm. My second restaurant opened in Brooklyn, smaller, more intimate, focused on seasonal vegetarian tasting menus. It's called Lightwell, named after the shaft of morning sun that used to hit the floor of my first apartment kitchen, back when I had nothing but a borrowed pan and a heart full of hunger. The cookbook came out last month. I cried when I held it. Not because it made me famous or rich, it didn't. But because there it was, 120 pages of food, memory, mistakes, joy, pain, and healing. My story, in my words, for whoever needed to hear it. Every day still takes work. I still wake before dawn. I still scrub down cutting boards. I still test and tweak and redo. But the pressure feels different now. It's not about survival. It's about care, craft, purpose. I've started mentoring 3 young women from culinary programs across the city. One of them, Zoe, reminds me of myself. Fierce, uncertain, full of flavor and fight. Watching her grow is a kind of healing I didn't expect, like giving back to the version of me that once sat crying in a walk-in fridge, wondering if any of this was worth it. Some nights, I stay after service, pouring myself a small glass of wine, sitting at table 7, my favorite. I watch the last customers laugh. I listen to the plates return clean. I hear the kitchen wind down, and I breathe. Deeply, slowly. Not because I'm trying to calm myself, but because for once, I can. This life isn't glamorous, it's not effortless, but it's mine, and it's enough. I don't think about proving anything anymore. I think about saffron, about how basil turns bitter if you bruise it, about the perfect roast on a peach. I think about joy. About building spaces where people feel seen, because for too long I wasn't. They laughed at me once, many times, quietly, sharply, dismissively. But I didn't build this life to get the last word. I built it so I wouldn't need one. Sometimes the most powerful kind of revenge isn't loud, isn't explosive, isn't a confrontation played out in front of an audience. It's quiet. It's walking into a room where no one expected anything of you and letting your success speak louder than your name ever could. It's building something from the ground up, while everyone assumed you were still lost. It's rising, steadily, silently, without asking for validation or permission. It's showing up not to prove them wrong, but because you no longer need to be right. That's the real power. That's the kind of success no one can touch, and perhaps the most satisfying kind of closure isn't slamming the door or yelling across a dinner table. It's reaching the point where you simply no longer need it to be open. It's realizing that the people who once dismissed you, doubted you, reduced you, don't define you anymore. Not because they changed, but because you outgrew the need for their understanding. You stopped performing for their praise. You stopped shrinking for their comfort. And once you stop seeking approval from people who never tried to see the real you, something incredible happens. You get your life back. You begin to build not for recognition, but for joy. Not for applause, but for truth. The truth of who you are. The truth of what you love. And in that truth, there is peace. Not because it's perfect, not because it's easy, but because it's yours, entirely, unapologetically, authentically. So if you are still waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be enough in the eyes of people who only know how to measure success by titles, trophies, or tradition, I hope you remember this. You don't need their map to reach your destination. You don't need their language to tell your story. And you certainly don't need their applause to be worthy of your own voice. Sometimes, the greatest triumph is simply becoming who you were always meant to be. Quietly, honestly, and without regret. I had doubted everything. My choices, my strength, my place in the world. But I never stopped. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone, but because I simply couldn't imagine betraying the truth of who I was. In choosing authenticity over approval, I discovered something far more lasting than success or family acceptance. I found something no one could give or take away from me. I found myself. And maybe that's the real question. Have you ever stood at the crossroads between who they want you to be and who you know you are? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this touched something in you, don't forget like the video and subscribe for more true stories of resilience and quiet strength. And please, share this with someone who might need a gentle reminder that the most powerful kind of approval doesn't come from others, it comes from within. Thank you for walking this journey with me. And remember, real success isn't measured by someone else's standards. It's found in the joy, the purpose, and the peace you create along your own path. Join this channel and step into a world of soulful AI-crafted storytelling designed to move you, inspire you, and stay with you long after the story ends.